Good morning and a very warm welcome to you all on this, what you can only describe is a monsoon day. If any of you have been to India or the Far East, you'll know this is how the monsoon feels. Suddenly we are now in Europe going to have monsoon season. That's the impact of climate change. Yet some of our politicians still believe it's just, not really the real thing. But there you go. Let's see what happens in the next 5 weeks or at least 3 months. They'll still get I suppose we'll all get a punch in terms of the impact of climate change on all our lives. However, here today, we're here to talk about the future of energy and shaping energy policy and find out the state of energy policy for the moment. As the new college emerges and we get a new mandate fully in speed as of next year. And let's see, but before I do, I want to warmly welcome all of you, but also those who are online. Thank you for joining us. And, if you do wish to raise a question, don't hesitate to use the usual hashtag and email, send them a message, and we'll try and take your questions and your commentaries for those of you online. On here, those of you who are here, we'll also ask you to, I'll pick on you if you're not active or proactive, or just raise your hand, because it's the most important thing is that, this is a summit of let's say 2 or 3 hours. You're not going to get that time back in your life. So let's use it effectively. Make it, the intelligence is not just here in this panel, it's in the room. We firmly believe that. We try and make sure that we have a mix of people in the room, both on the panel and in the audience, that are from every sector. So we try and join up the dots from, let's say public, private, civil society, and we take a citizen approach to what we do. So this is in two parts, if you like, in the summit. In the first part, we're looking at the whole issue of creating a resilient system, energy system. And by that is something that was able to withstand shock, something which is able to provide security, and something which is able to enable us to have faith and trust in. The second session is very much around the whole issue of how do we respond to this kind of, everyone talks about draggy, draggy, draggy. It's like a mantra. It's like you're almost doing your bead pearls, draggy, draggy, letter, letter. So letter and draggy reports have clearly created a momentum. And I was saying this last night when we were having our discussion, is that they feel like, two sides of the same coin of a message to the EU about being bolder, don't do what you've always done, do it at speed and do it at scale. And I think those are the key messages coming out from those reports, that, the time is ripe, the time is now, but it's a do or die moment. Because if you don't act in the next 3 or 4 years, other powers and other forces will most definitely take the lead, and Europe will become an even smaller partner in this world that we're living in, but also both in the tech and energy field. So, before I invite, and I'm really pleased that we have the International Energy Agency rep Brent here, who only yesterday launched a report in Paris with Fatih Birol. I'm going to start with him, but before I do, I just want to kind of remind us of some facts or data that I think we should drive our conversation and our conscience. About 50 million people, so that's around about just about 11% or so, 50 million people are currently in energy poverty in Europe. Now, those are the people that actually are being, let's say, monitored, or we know are in fuel poverty. There are probably millions more in reality that are off the grid and off the radar. So let's remember that let's take a people-first approach to this conversation. Whilst we think about competition and we think about competitiveness and economic growth, there's a large chunk of Europe that is currently in fuel and energy poverty. And let's not forget, that's at the bottom end. In the middle end, it's also the middle end is pinched very significantly in terms of how much of someone's available income is going into fuel, basically. So let's not forget that point. The other thing is that despite everyone's chat around renewables, right? We know it's cheaper now. We know it's possible at speed. We're only at 50%. We're only at 50% of what we need to achieve by 2030. So, in reality, there's an ambition of the Green Deal, making sure that it's both people, infrastructure, and let's say competitive and green. There are some basic signals that we need to pay attention to. That is one, about the people. The other, that renewables that should be further ahead than they are at the moment are not, clearly. The way in which the market plays regard to energy is not very transparent. We know that those who are trading in the market are not necessarily trading on the things that will support our infrastructure into the future. And it's not being structured, it's not very transparent. The financial market around energy is not very transparent either. And we know that the way in which the pricing works is a fault of the system. So people buy at point in time, when and which means that you've got a very, very highly flexible, highly fluctuating energy system in terms of pricing. It shouldn't have to be that way. You can create longer term solutions on this agenda, which are simply not being borne out in reality. And so I think it's really important that we need to remember that these infrastructure issues about the market, about this pace of renewables, and the final point is on tax. I think it's really surprising that, we have no level playing field as far as tax is concerned on the energy system. So where countries need tax receipts, public sector tax receipts, the tax is high. So Poland and Cyprus, 30%, go figure, on energy, whereas other member states are either at 5% or even at minus. So I think we need to think about the future of energy policy in a more holistic way and not forget that actually by chugging down the competitive track that we don't leave people behind and we don't make sure we reform the system at hand. So on that cheery note, Brent, you're in Paris, lovely Paris yesterday, and you launched, as you do annually, the energy report. Tell us about the state of energy, Brent.
Okay, very easy one. Yeah,
very easy one.
In 5 minutes.
2 minutes.
Okay,
Yeah.
2 minutes.
No.
Even better. Good morning, everyone here in the room and online. My name is Brent Warner from the International Energy Agency, and I am happy to talk about a little bit about the World Energy Outlook 2024 that was launched yesterday. Very happy, culminating another year of effort to gather the state of the global energy picture and today and in the future. So I'd be happy to set a bit of the context for the discussions, a few points on the global side. As you mentioned, I think this reliance on fossil fuels still today is very real. If you look beyond Europe, if you look at the world level, we actually get 80% of global energy is through fossil fuels today, and 60% of electricity at the world level is from fossil fuels. So we are a long way from certainly any kind of net zero goals that we're all talking about and trying to get to. And this is kind of sets the scene then for three big themes from the World Energy Outlook this year. The first is that we do see the peak in global CO2 emissions as imminent. We see this really could be this year, next year. It's very much dependent on just a few small factors, but we are very much at the top of the hill in terms of CO2 emissions, and so a critical turning point. But that also then means we have 38 gigatons of CO2 emissions to remove from energy systems annually to get to net zero. So this is a big factor. When we look to 2030, we confirmed this year that global fossil fuels, we see peaks for each oil, natural gas, and coal by 2030. This was something, a first finding last year in the World Energy Outlook 2023, and we've confirmed that. There's a lot of discussion going on in various fuels and markets, and that's what we see as kind of the second theme, is around that we see we're going into an era of abundant energy. So we're not there yet. We are still coming out of the global energy crisis, but we do see that markets are becoming better supplied for natural gas. We see a wave of new LNG capacity coming online in several countries, and that will make global gas markets ease a bit and be more of a buyer's market there. We see that also for oil. At the moment, there is about 6 million barrels per day of spare capacity in global oil markets. But these are also, we shouldn't rest here. We need to stay vigilant to make sure energy is secure. We highlight in our World Energy Outlook that actually this excess capacity of oil, for example, is quite vulnerable to any disruptions in trade routes, including the Straits of Hormuz, that most of that spare capacity would disappear. The same for gas markets, that we need to be very vigilant about what this can mean. And of course, clean energy. Renewables are here, cheap, and growing very fast. 560 gigawatts of new renewables were added in 2023. That's a huge number, up more than 40% from the year before. So we're here. Solar PV and wind are the cheapest sources of electricity in most markets today. So this gives us a huge opportunity that we will have abundant clean energy, softer markets for oil and gas. And so this is a new opportunity. And the third theme is really that we're entering the age of electricity. We've seen this already. In the past decade, electricity has grown much faster than total energy demand, twice as fast. And as we go to the next 10 years or out to 2035, we see that electricity demand will grow 6 times faster than total energy demand. Meaning that as we're electrifying more uses, we have more electric vehicles, more heat pumps. We also have the rise of use in artificial intelligence and data centers is a big factor we're watching closely. We'll see economic and electricity demand growth in regions all around the world. So advanced economies, there will be renewed growth of electricity demand, including here in Europe, which has been stagnant for many years. And this is something that is then changing the picture because these clean energy options, solar and wind, can play a bigger role as we electrify to drive down emissions and to drive the transitions overall. And I think for Europe, and I think will be the points of discussion, many of these themes are consistent here. And I would just say kind of a final point here is that we see with the growth of renewables that focusing on electricity grids and storage will be essential to underpinning that growth of renewables and making sure that we have reliable and clean power at all hours of the year, in all hours of the day. So thank you.
You've done it even within 5 minutes. Brent, keep the mic on. It feels like, everything's rosy in the park from what you've just said, in the sense that, we're all, abundant electricity, it's all going to be good and blah, but it doesn't feel like that on the ground, right, for people who are consuming energy, who are trying to access adaptation facilities or don't feel, I mean, member states, we don't have a grid that's operational. We don't have a single market that really works in the true sense of the word. I know, Mechtil, you're looking at me, you can come back and respond to that. No, but there's something about, isn't there a gap? I mean, in terms of what you're forecasting, what you see, and the pace that's required of investment to get to the point you're talking about. I mean, are people going to have to wait 5 years or 10 years for the holy grail that you've just pointed out, that, wow, it's great, we're going to abundance and age of electrification?
I think we're very much already seeing movement here. So I think I agree that we are on the cusp of these ages that I've mentioned. So the LNG markets, for example, are still tightening. But for example, the oil price is relatively low, right? Is under $80 per barrel. So actually we're partially in this. We're entering these ages. But again, there are political risks. There's geopolitical risks. There's tensions. Of course, we're watching the news every day. Right before our launch, of course, we're watching very closely to see if anything is changing in the world picture. So I think it's a tentative, positive message, but it means that we have these opportunities in front of us. So there are parts that we can control and parts of this picture that are out of our control, but we are moving towards that. And so I think as you mentioned, I mean, what we're seeing then today is sort of the first inklings of this. Okay. So investment in grids, for example, has increased by 20% just in the last 2 years globally. Battery capacity is now deployed, more than doubled in 2023 compared to 2022. Renewables grew. So we are seeing the predictors and the beginning of these trends.
There's more green shoots rather than, rosy in the park, really. We are seeing the green shoots.
The green shoots that are, quite clear, yes.
Okay, all right. Well, let's come back to one point, I think, in the comments. And plus, we hear a lot about the Draghi report says that you need 800 billion, there's a kind of money gap, potentially. I'm not sure as a think tank we believe there's a money gap. I think there's money there, but this needs to be more smartly used, potentially. But thank you. We'll come back to you. Mathilde, good to have you back again, and you're obviously in the midst of so much going on around you, given the new college and the kind of scrutiny process about to be upon us, and there's a kind of a sense of let's say some bits you know, some bits you don't know, if you like, and you are in the Director General for Energy, or the Director General for Energy. What can we expect in terms of the industrial clean strategy that you're putting together in terms of energy? What can you share about the direction of travel in policy terms?
So thank you very much. I'm also pleased to be here. Let's start with what I know.
Yeah.
before I could venture what the new Commission is doing, because that might be a bit difficult. So first of all, congratulations to the World Energy Outlook, to the team. I think there is indeed a lot of good news. I mean, we are in a world where we always look at the bad news, but I think there is a lot happening globally, but also EU-wide. We come out of an unprecedented crisis. I think we have never, at least in our lifetime, not witnessed this kind of crisis with the risk of security of supply and with energy prices in August 2022, which we have never seen before. And we managed together, all member states, stakeholders, to come out of this crisis, get the Russian gas imports down from 45% to 15%, get the demand down, get electrification. We still have to work on it, and that I will come to. And that also have in EU record years for wind and solar, which is 50%, and we need to do more. So just to put that in a context, energy prices will be one of the topics of the next Commission, and that is part of the Clean Industrial Deal, which the new Commission will put in the first 100 days, whenever that starts. But that will be accompanied by an action plan on energy, affordable energy, and we would like to say action plan on affordable energy and not energy prices, because it's very much about the cost of energy more than the actual prices. So in that sense, I think with the new Commission, we know we will continue the European Green Deal implementation. There is a lot which had been tabled, and member states have to implement the Renewables Directive, the market design, energy efficiency, which will equip us better for an eventual next crisis. You spoke about energy prices, and that is really one of the big themes in the Clean Industrial Deal, in the Professor Draghi report, and in many others. So we are working on what can we do on this affordable prices, and what you mentioned as well for the energy poor. And that will definitely be a priority also for the next Commission. So on the energy prices, we are basically back on the pre-crisis level. I mentioned the peaks, I mentioned the EMD, the electricity market design reform, where we also encourage member states to look more on the medium to longer term, put PPAs, power purchase agreements, CFDs, and the means to have also in the future. We also look at our consumers to be more proactive and more protected. All this comes out of the crisis, all this is happening and needs to be speeded up. So the Clean Industrial Deal, we have started working on it.
Of course, yes. You just can't share it with us right now, can you? That's the problem.
No, because I think we have to wait where we have our Executive Vice President and Commission in place. But as you said, we have a lot of focus on energy, on the energy prices. What can we do more? And here I think hand in hand will go renewables development, acceleration. We have an ambitious target for 2030. The grids, definitely. I think we have been already working on an action plan on grids, transmission grids, distribution grids, and obviously our key role from the European Commission is the cross-border interconnections, which I think have some success stories already, but which we definitely need to speed up. And that also, Draghi says, with more renewables projects, we see curtailments in some of our countries. So obviously we need to speed up grids. We need to speed up flexibility, because the supply and demand reaction and demand response and the possibility for storage is not yet there. So we have to increase, and there are also some elements in our legislation to be implemented, but we need to make it happen. And I would also maybe end with electrification. It's starting to happen, but not enough. So we are also planning for the Commission, maybe not in the first 100 days, but that will be, I would say, a bit the scene setter, the Clean Industrial Deal, the Affordable Energy Action Plan. There will be a lot in it, but later the year, later in the mandate, we will certainly come up with an action plan on electrification. And that is, I think, the way forward we are planning right now. There's much more to say on the
I know there
Commission,
is.
And but I will focus on that.
Indeed, I'm going to come back to you, because, I mean, one of the things is that, you know, the last mandate, or as it's ending, you've passed, you know, almost 380 or nearly 400 bits of, let's say, policy, chutzpah, or regulations, etc. Everyone's kind of hoping that this becomes a mandate of delivery and implementation rather than even more clutter in the system. And I mean that in the most respectful way, because you've heard this yourself. People in this audience, so those who are from the sector, else will know, enough, basta. Just let's get on with doing the do. You also know, you've been there, you know, long enough to know that the question about the grid has been long-standing. It's partly political. What do you how do you plan to make sure that we are able to get movement when you know we haven't been able to get movement on getting a fine grid in place for a whole range of, let's say, intra-country issues? What are the kind of ways in which you're going to try and learn from where we've been? What kind of incentives do you think you can create?
So on grids, I think we have good cross-border example in the Baltics, but I leave Albinas to talk about that. We have also in other parts. What we need to do is definitely use our existing grids more efficiently.
Okay.
There's a rule that trading should go up to 70%. We are not yet there, space capacity. We need to build new grids. And there we have figures, it's a huge investments, and we have to look who then pays for it. That is the network tariffs, which we have to look how to make it most efficient. And then also we need to look at permitting, both for renewables and grids. And there we have already something in our current legislation how to speed up permitting for renewables and related grids. And we have first very good examples. For example, a country like Germany have speeded up renewables and grids, others probably as well. And we know we have to do more and implement and work with the member states. What are the best practice to do that? But I think we see first signs, but it's clear that the grids question will be something needed, and more investment is needed, in particular from private.
Indeed,
so
because
our public money, CEF, which I would really strongly recommend also for the next MFF, but it's not enough. We need private investment.
Indeed, I mean, it's absolutely evident, and you know, I'll move to the private sector at the moment because Xavier here, who's going to share his thoughts. But you know, it's going to have to be a new type of public-private deal that is in place if we're going to move in this direction. But in effect, what needs to happen is that the kind of, let's say, push that's required to kind of really upscale grid development is going to be the most urgent issue, I would have thought, because if you read the Draghi report, you can't get the competitiveness and the efficiencies if you don't have a functioning grid in place. It's almost like the pivot on which the competitiveness argument rests to a certain extent. But I won't bother you further unless you want to say something. Please.
I would agree.
Okay, good. That's good to know. Excellent. Xavier, thank you for being with us. So now we've had an international agency on energy, we've had the Commission, now we go to the private sector, and it's good to have you here with us. Could you describe for us what do you think is required to boost a resilient electrification process whilst being, you know, let's say, competitive and secure?
And decarbonize.
And well, obviously, absolutely.
So thank you for your question. It's a pleasure to be here with the panelists. So I belong to the EDF company, and I'm a senior executive in charge of strategy, R&D, innovation, development. I would say in a nutshell that the answer to your question is what are the conditions to see the age of electricity, as Brent said, becoming really a reality in European Union for the years to come. So obviously, the electrification of the economies, of our economies, is a key lever to decarbonize, to get the energy security, the energy sovereignty, and probably the competitiveness of our economies. We have already quite a lot of low-carbon electricity in Europe. During the first semester, I get the figure, it's 74% of the electricity produced in the European Union was low-carbon electricity. So it's 26 coming out from fossil, but it's quite a good number. So now we need to continue. We need to continue introducing massive low-carbon electricity on our grids. We need to modify and invest on our grids. I fully agree. We have a real industrial issue on a massive scale to continue introducing low-carbon electricity in the European grids in a competitive way. My wish would be, it won't be a surprise for you, that we we could be technology neutral on this topic, so it means renewable but also nuclear, but at the end of the day, having something manageable on the grid, and which is low carbon, has quite a number of advantages. We need to continue investing on flexibility. The company to which I belong will invest towards 27 gigawatts of flexibility, low carbon flexibility between now and 2035, which I think is needed on the grids on which we are operating. And my first message is that the game is not between nuclear and renewable in Europe. I know it's a dream to say that, but the game is between fossil and low carbon electricity. And it would be a kind of wisdom if Europe could be able to switch from a wrong game to the real game. This is the production part. My most important message today is that we need to focus on the demand side. You know, I think that now the process is on for the production side. We have this huge amount of new renewable each year. We have investment plans in nuclear. We have investment plans in flexibility and so on. But the demand is stable. In fact, now, last year we had 23% of the energy used in the European Union came from electricity. If we want to reach the net zero, it has to be between 50 and 60% in 2050. And this figure, 2023, is stable from 10 years. Yeah. So we need now to move on. How? I think that getting medium and long-term contract between the utilities and the customers is a key lever. I think we need to switch from financing the offer to financing the demand. Now for the offer, it's okay. We have a lot to do, but it's okay. It's quite okay. We need to help the demand side. For example, we have an idea. It's one idea. We could develop a European electrification bank able to help financing projects on the demand side to help the industrials switching from fossil consumption to electricity. It has a cost. It's difficult to find a return on investment on many topics. It has to be helped, and it's a kind of public-private partnership that would be okay to decarbonize Europe. We have to monitor also. You know, we know at 1% precision which part of renewable we have, which part of nuclear, and so on. But we don't monitor the switch from fossil to low carbon electricity. We don't monitor it. We have to monitor it. We have to put it as an objective for Europe for 2030, 2035, and so on. And lastly, we have to rely on the European supply chain, because sovereignty, security needs a European supply chain for energy. So I think we have a lot of investment to do in this side. It's good news for the economies. Obviously, we will continue working with other economies in the world, in Asia and America, I hope in a fair way, and I'm sure that the European Union has now the tool to do it in a fair way. But we need to get a European supply chain able to develop the European electricity grids and the European electricity production and demand adaptation that we need.
Very extremely well thought through, and thank you, very wise words. Can I probe a little bit further with you about the stimulating, or like let's focusing and investing on the demand side? That thing that you just said about electrification marker, a marker if you like, or a standard. Say a little bit more about that and whether you feel that other private sector players would be buying into that. Have you spoken to other players that, and also the intra-government thing? So what capacity do you see currently, our appetite, for really kind of making sure that member states, even if it's sub-regionally, collaborate on something like that?
Two answers. The first one is my company takes an engagement. This is new. We take the engagement that from now till 2035, we will find 150 terawatt-hour a year switch from fossil to electricity. So we don't wait for the customer to come to us and say, oh, how can I decarbonize? We will go to the customer and say, should you do that and that and that? I give you this offer, I give you this production, and you will switch from gas or fuel to electricity. Okay. 150 terawatt-hour a year. This is quite huge. And this is our own engagement. The second part is that the European bank, electrification bank that I was calling, it can be a partnership between countries on a regional way. For example, in Scandinavia, in Eastern Europe, in South Europe. And we could imagine a kind of inverse auction. For example, you choose an industrial sector, and you say, okay, in this sector, how do you need to be helped in the Eastern Europe, in Scandinavia, and so on, to be fair on the market? And how much do you need to switch from gas or fuel to electricity? And you take it in the merit order way. It can be a kind of cooperation between countries in a regional way inside Europe. I say Scandinavia because the market rules are quite the same. I say Eastern Europe because the market rules are quite the same, and the price is quite the same. So it's quite fair. And we could imagine a regional, at this level, a kind of cooperation and an investment from the European level.
Have you just told us a brand new idea, or are you working on it right now?
We are working on that now. We already had discussion
Tweet
with the
that.
Commission.
Absolutely. No, but it's great. It shows the kind of leadership that we need from the private sector. You know, that you're showing that kind of a can-do sense, that we can bring, let's say, let's say administrations that are possibly a bit slow in the uptake to move with the sign of the times by actually doing what's required and making sure you're acting as you'd want others to act. Before I move on to the Minister and our other two contributors, bring you in, because there's a lot of speaking here at this end, and we want to engage you too. What are your reactions to what you've heard so far, either from the energy report, whether it's to do with what Matilda said about the clean industrial deal, or what we've heard just now about this this electrification standard bear across Europe, and the notion of creating communities of interest, which, as you say, is completely possible because there is an instrument in the EU that if, let's say, up to 8 member states want to cooperate, they can. And we mentioned that in this lovely report, so let me just brand this again, our renewed social contract. Go to the accelerated decarbonisation, and you'll see the idea here in terms of what you can do if 5 to 8 member states want to do something different. So, over to you. Any questions? Excellent. I'm going to take the lady there first. Just in front of you.
Thank you, Pascaline Gabory, Pilot for Dev, which is a small NGO working on also climate and governance. I'm very interested in your presentations, and especially in this European Electrification Bank. Can you guarantee, if it is working and if it is this huge, massive demand of decarbonized electricity, that you are going to be able to provide the supply? As we've seen in France, there have been the nuclear plants which had to stop during the summer because of the cooling problem due also to the rivers being impacted by climate change. And then my second question, which is more general, what would you expect from the Baku COP29 coming up in November? Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Gentleman there, here, just at the front.
Yes, hello. My name is Eero Koskinen. I work for IEEP, the Institute for European Environmental Policy. Thank you for the introduction so far. Actually, I would like to add a global aspect to this discussion, because obviously the climate and energy challenges that we're facing are not only restricted to Europe, but they are global ones. Do you think that the EU should have a role in supporting third countries in their own green transition, for instance, by adding new elements in our existing partnership agreements that we have with them, or by adding these elements in future free trade agreements with third countries? Thank you.
What's your view?
I think definitely we should. We should have a role. I think also the EU could have a level playing field in supporting these countries in many ways, and obviously there's also a historical perspective that maybe we should remember our own legacy with some of these countries, and should support them in the future in a better way. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Lady just in front, I'll come to you as well, don't worry.
Thank you very much. My name is Fialina Lange. I work for Trina Solar, a manufacturer of solar modules. And my question is directed to Mrs. Verstoffer. There was quite some talk about the grid development, and we also know how difficult it is to actually finance and permit grids. And so my question is, how will the Commission support industry in building direct via PPAs, as it is currently required in the draft proposal for the calculation of the carbon footprint? And if I can add here a piece of opinion, I think that will be a very, very difficult thing to do, actually. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gentleman here.
Thank you. Robert Hodgson from Euronews. I just want to finesse the question on COP29 a little bit and ask specifically what the panelists and the Commission in particular hopes to see in terms of the wording on the fossil fuel phase out, because at the moment we have an agreement that we should phase out as quickly as possible unabated coal. We've still got coal in there. And then a general phase down, which has to be just and as quick as possible, but so on. But do we need something a bit more specific to come out of Baku this time? And what impact will the wording of the COP agreement this year have on what the Commission does in its clean industry deal and energy policy in general under the next Commission? Thank you.
Okay. Nigel, can I take that one first with you?
So thank you very much. I will try to take these questions, what concerns Commission. So on Baku and COP29, it's obviously an important step before COP30 next year in Brazil, where more decisions are taken. From the Commission side, what I can say from DG Energy is more and more part of COPs. If you compare 10 years ago, I mean, it's still a climate negotiation, but energy and the role of clean energy and phasing out fossil fuel is top on the agenda. So there was an environmental council on Monday where the COP29 EU position was discussed. I think there were more or less agreement on the ambition. We have proposed the climate law for 2050 and the implementation, and we have proposed the 2040 targets of 90% greenhouse gas emission. That was discussed in that Environmental Council, and there's a reference to that, but not with a target. You can see how difficult it is to get the EU member states on that, and that the new Commission will take up as one of the first steps in the 100 days from the Climate Commissioner side. Another debate was on nuclear and renewables, but I think that if we can agree on low carbon, I think there is not a major issue, and I think there was an agreement. So we are preparing as EU for an ambitious statement on COP, but obviously that needs to be then negotiated in November in Baku. So that's my take from the energy side. I think on electrification,
yeah, Xavier deal with that. But
on the EU and the global world, obviously this is a top priority. I mean, we have done a lot on our European Green Deal, on the 2050 climate law, 2030 energy and climate targets. This is something we are discussing with many, many other parts, either multilaterally in G20, G7, but also bilaterally. We have MOUs with a number of North African countries. We are working with Western Balkan countries. We are working in a US Energy Council with the US. So, I mean, we do discuss it basically with all key partners, be it as an MOU, be it as exchanging on technology, be it as green hydrogen or low carbon hydrogen imports, be it on renewables development. I mean, I must say, in the last couple of years, in most of our external relation, energy was part in one way or the other. So it's really a top priority. We have Global Gateway, where we are pushing also. So I think there are many good examples where we are working with Egypt and others as part of the negotiation. So it's absolutely key. And maybe the last question, if I understood correctly, on solar, this is obviously an industry we have done quite a lot also in the last couple of years. We have solar pledge, and we're really looking at the industrial side, which obviously, speaking about EU industry and solar, the case is quasi lost in the sense that more than 90% of solar PV is produced in China. So we are concentrating on other parts, wind, hydrogen, and many others. And there, I think we look at what is possible right now in some of the niche production. And when it comes to PPAs, my understanding, this is normally between business and business. Whatever we can do to help guarantee it and make it happen, we will do. But I'm happy to take it up further bilaterally. Thank you.
Thank you. Xavier.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the question, because this is a question that we often have, and I think this is a key topic, in fact. My feeling is the following, is that we have enough electricity this time, and that if I should be a little bit surprising, the risk, should we don't put the focus on the demand, the risk would be reverse. The risk would be we have too much electricity. In France at the time, we are consuming the same amount of electricity we were consuming in 2005. Because there were many efforts on the energy sobriety, and it's good news. We don't really see the switch from fossil to electricity, as I said, and we have the consumption we had 20 years ago, but we have much more electricity on the grid. And to take your example, this year we had very few outages or modulation due to climate condition on the nuclear plants, but we had many outages and production reduction due to the fact that we had too much electricity on the grid coming out from facilities which had the priority from the contractual point of view. So we lost a number of terawatt hour from the nuclear power plant because we had too much electricity. And we continue introducing in France between 10 and 12 terawatt hours a year new electricity on the grid. In many countries it's the same. So we really should focus on the demand, because if we do not focus on the demand, at the end of the day, we will not decarbonize, and we will have difficulties on the grids and on the electrical systems, because we will have a wrong balance between the offer and the demand.
Sure, but the point was that can people trust that there'll be enough about? That's the question. Is there, because there's you taking a leadership role as a company, right? But what if other parts of Europe don't do that, and then we're left with this classic imbalance again?
I think every country and at the European level the same. We have to think about the offer condition we have. We have to program flexibility, new flexibility solutions on the production side, but also on the demand side. Anyway, we have to work on the grids. And we have to find roads which are sure roads for electrification, but it's possible. It's really possible. And I'm not afraid that the fact that Europe can lack of electricity in 5 or 10 years in the future. On the reverse side, I'm fearing that if we don't look very carefully on the demand side, our system won't work in the right way.
I think Manon, you wanted to come in, didn't you?
Thank you. Manon Dufour from East Regina. I wanted to add up on to add a bit on the global dimension, where I mean we know the political context here. Like the past few years have really put like sovereignty back on, and like all the tensions, the trade tensions have led to a focus on more like domestic supply chain, domestic issues. I understand that it's clear. I think now we're at the verge of the next 5 years is going to be a balancing act between managing between like a big like free trade agenda as we had, and maybe something a bit more inward looking. I think there's a real risk that we start kind of building a kind of fortress Europe approach, and that has to change. I think the driver that we've had for a very long time for being a leader globally was very. Actually, a lot of it was kind of led by kind of historical values, or just a sense of being kind of a leader in that field. I think that maybe will be less of a driver, like the global solidarity will probably be less of a driver for European leaders. That said, there's a real kind of case for continuing with the kind of the same kind of external focus policy, in particular when it comes to the clean economy. So a few examples on that. There's first of all, we've diversified from kind of Russia, or we're trying to. We still have a bit to go. But we've still really, a lot of the energy diplomacy relationships have been about securing new gas and doing a bit of clean on the side. I think that has to be reset more widely. We are one of the first importers for a lot of countries that are extremely dependent on us as an importer. And if you look at how our projections for gas demand over the next 20 years, they're gonna kind of disappear, and it's gonna leave these countries extremely vulnerable. So it's in their interest, but also in our interest to build to reset the relationship and really help them transition themselves. It's also, even if we do build more domestic manufacturing, we're still going to be extremely dependent on global supply chains, global supply for materials. So it's again in our interest to think of supply chains and building expertise in the rest of the world, because even if we diversify from Russia, even if we diversify from China or other things, we're not going to build it all, and if we do, it's going to be extremely costly. We are going to be a strong player in a kind of a multilateral world order,
yes.
And we have to kind of design the policies that are doing that. Maybe one more thing. So, and there's a few opportunities already on the Commission agenda. So there are a few, a redefinition of the clean partnerships, clean economy and investment partnerships. I think is very promising. But clearly, in world stages like Baku, it's where showing up as a leader on some of the fossil fuel, energy efficiency, and renewable pledges also helps driving some of the clean economy focused relationships going forward.
Sure, and it's that point. I'm glad you made the point, because I was interviewing the chairman of GIZ, the largest development agency in Europe, only yesterday morning, and he was saying that we need to be able to join up the dots between the global gateway and what our needs are, and actually development, if you want to call it that in the future, has to be about peace, security and resilience of systems. And actually, in relation to Africa, there is so much more that companies can do to create energy resources. And the point you make is that one lesson we've learned from the Russia example is that have a distributed supply chain and don't, make sure that it's not only just in Europe, but potentially just our neighbour, which is Africa. But thank you for making those points, really well made. I want to now turn to Albinas, if I may. You've been very patient. Thank you for joining us. You're energy minister in Lithuania, and you're a very busy man, and you've been obviously in discussions a lot this week, I imagine, with fellows, colleagues from across Europe. You've been in the eye of the storm as far as, weaning off of Russia, being, very close to it. Can you describe for us what you've been able to do? What kind of instruments and approaches has enabled you to wean off the system from Russia, but find different solutions in Lithuania?
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning. Well, indeed, for the last 4 years, I was overseeing one of the fastest energy transformations in the world. We are number 3, I guess, in terms of developing renewable energy. And I think the first thing we did when war started was to clean our house, meaning that we got rid of all Russian energy within 1.5 months in the beginning of 22. And that was followed by enormous launching of new renewable generating capacity. We have doubled our domestic production in 4 years' time, and we spent very little public money on that, because our firm belief that whatever policy we do, we should not go out from the influence of the market. We've been in the Soviet regulated economy 30 years ago.
Indeed.
We saw what that means, and so this mistake should not be repeated. Then another thing what we did much earlier than the EU did was permitting processes simplification at a national level. Of course, we were very happy that our population saw that energy transformation as a way to get free from Russia. So we managed also to reduce bureaucracy, and by that also reduce subsidies for launching new energy. And I think naturally we mentioned several times the Draghi report. That's a brilliant report, but the reports don't change situation on the ground. The policy choices that do that. So first, we have to clean European energy market from Russian fossil fuels. And the situation in 24 is really alarming because imports from Russia are growing.
Yes, indeed.
And some people are simply profiteering in that situation. So
can you just pause you,
this
just for this audience to know,
Yeah.
just because the message doesn't seem to come home, that member states are continuing to use LNG fuel.
Some member states.
So, as I said, some, despite a whole Europe approach to sanctions and weaning off. I think it's just important for us to know that, you know, there is a kind of a meism rather than us, Europe approach in this. Please.
Yeah, and to continue, I don't have a silver bullet how to change the energy system in the EU, and I think nobody has. But the only real way for failure is keeping business as usual. So we have to continue decarbonization, we have to continue our energy transition, and we have to employ genuine industrial policy when it comes to energy. And I think we should start again from the point of security. And we should be absolutely sure that everything we put on our grid is safe. Example from Lithuania, we started really checking what solar inverters can do for the grid. And the decision is that solar inverters which have capacity above 100 kilowatts have come from countries we trust. I think these rules should slowly come into our public procurement, and we at least have to de-risk our energy system from the countries that pose risk to our freedom and our prosperity. And then I guess the other industries will follow, because you have to make your equipment to communicate with the equipment which communicates to the grid. So I think that is something to work together at the European level, and I think this is the way where our policy actions could make a real difference.
Extremely insightful and thoughtful, illuminating, Albinas, as always. Can I just ask you a little bit about how your peers are reacting to the kind of message you're delivering here today? You know, how are other energy ministers or those with a similar portfolio reacting to what you're saying? Because we had the discussion last evening, and some of colleagues from the east of Europe were saying that the Draghi report's fantastic, but it seems to be Central West European centric, not taking account of Central Eastern Europe in terms of the context and culture. But putting that aside, in terms of other ministers in Europe, are they on the same kind of trajectory as you? Or what's the kind of challenge that you think politically in moving to the direction you just set out?
Well, I think the very easy discussion was in the Baltic region, which is directly exposed to Russia.
Yeah.
I mean, and it is quite obvious that in the Baltics we see fire of the war. When you come more to the west, people still see some smoke. But on the very, very western part of Europe, people see nothing. And they continue business as usual. So this discussion is, not very easy. I mean, we started, agreeing positions regionally. We were quite successful. Now we are having a discussion at the European level. We are raising issue of Russian imports already from the beginning of the year when the statistics started, popping out that there is something wrong. And so far, we are nowhere with that discussion. And that is really troublesome.
Mechtil, you need to respond, because I know because this is being repeated. I mean, only last night we had this from colleagues from Latvia and Lithuania who felt this. And we are hearing this message more and more that, because we're so, and I love your metaphor, because we're so far away from the fire, and we're not even in the smoke, that some of us are still, it's business as usual. When you put that against the ambition that you've just set out in terms of the deal that you're going to put together, and Xavier's point about, the private sector could lead in this, what would you make of that?
So I would like to come in for a couple of points. First of all, on the positive side, there is full support for Ukraine from all EU member states and the Commission, of course, to help them politically, but also I focus now on energy also during this winter. And we do, and member states and the Baltics and many others do a lot to help. When it comes to phasing out Russian fossil fuels, I think we all agree, there's the Versailles Declaration, that this must happen as soon as possible. Mm-hmm. So we succeeded in the last 2.5 years to come from 45% energy Russian gas imports to 15%. We see a trend, and there Albina is completely right, 18% right now. So very unfortunate, some EU member states are importing Russian gas via LNG in their country. And we do our utmost, and we had a good discussion already in the Energy Council, in the regional group. We had several meetings, what exactly to do, what are our legal means, political means, and pressure. And this is a top priority for this commission, and we already spoke about the next commission, that we will come out with a roadmap to phasing out the remaining Russian gas. So there are a few hooks where we can already act, together with the member states, of course, but Albinas is completely right, this is a top priority we need to do, and obviously geographically some EU member states are much more committed than others. What we have a line that all 27 need to act. The other part on sanctions, which is unanimity, which is not the easiest part.
Exactly.
There's the implementation of sanctions, the transparency question, where we are working with the member states. And I think, as I said, the roadmap will help the commitment the EU member states gave in Versailles and in EU Council, and it will be again discussed that this is absolutely a priority. And everything else we discussed, the speeding up of renewables, energy efficiency, industrial policy, is obviously also helping that game, because what Lithuania did in 4 years of renewables, all other member states
should be able to do.
And
Absolutely.
by the way, Baku has also the tripling of renewables and the doubling of energy efficiency, so it's also a global game, but the EU can lead on that. And we do what we can do from the Commission to support that.
I suppose the question in people's minds will be, and I'm not speaking for you, but this is, okay, it's my question, is that we know there's always been the truculent or difficult member state here and there that's held things back because of, unanimity and all that nonsense that we sometimes, it really holds back. Given the challenge and the need, the speed that you need to do things at, isn't there something about putting a more transparent approach to naming and shaming those who are simply doing the wrong thing, and then being able to create a community of interest to move it forward? And there are instruments you can use to move people forward. I mean, isn't the time gone now for kind of all this kind of talk about dilly-dallying around the politics of it and really being much more forceful? Is there a mood in the von der Leyen Commission, do you think, that to actually be more bold and brave?
Yeah, I think the President von der Leyen is definitely a person who can be very bold. You have heard her.
Indeed.
Recently. I had the pleasure to accompany her to go to Kiev. It was her 8th visit to Kiev recently, and the energy preparedness for this winter was one of the top priorities. So I think the Commission is bold, the President is bold, and that, as I said, is also a top message for the new Commission to continue that. We had a rather frank exchange this Energy Council on Tuesday in Luxembourg on it. We will continue and discuss that as a top priority.
Thank you. Manon, last but not least, you've had a bit of a bite at the cherry already, but I think bringing you in at this moment is the best, because you can give us a more, a joined up thinking around, we've got the Commission nominate scrutiny process ahead of us, and you are an agency that's been thinking very much, very hard around the whole clean energy transition. In terms of, do you think the Commission has a comprehensive clean economy approach, or what are the missing pieces in the jigsaw from your perspective?
No, thanks. Well, it is certainly extensive, and like the job specs we've seen, like for the new commissioners, and like the priorities emerging from the Commission are certainly have like clean economy and climate very strongly embedded. So like all the priorities are very aligned with the political limelight of the past few years. So security, sovereignty, but climate and clean economy is certainly part of it. First, one word on, I think you're asking, like the session is also on like the resilience of it all. I think there's also something interesting in the setup that whether it's like clean industrial deal or clean economy or climate, it's really shared, like it's now co-owned by 3 major political families in the proposed setup. So across EPP, SND and Renew, which might make it, one would hope, more politically resilient as well for what's to come. In terms of the missing gaps, I mean, I think the proposed vision, like the proposed priorities, really do plug a few gaps that we've had, or at least promises to attempt to do it, whether it's on industrial decarbonization or agriculture or like resilience against climate impact. So I think it's starting to do that. It is quite extensive. So I don't know if Maxime like counted the number of like action plans and strategies and vision papers. It's quite a lot. So the trick will be to see which ones have like real teeth. Maybe if I can pick one that I think was definitely missing, and I'm really kind of hopeful, is, and we've talked a bit about it on like with Xavier, is the clean industrial deal, but also a specific focus on industrial decarbonization and electrification of it. Because it might surprise some, but like industrial decarbonization hasn't been like a big focus so far. It's been missing. Like we've had like ETS prices, but it's only with like CBAM that we started thinking that maybe we should phase out free allowances, and like developments on hydrogen or CO2, or like a CO2 storage, just makes it possible to talk about decarbonizing it. And we've just, I think similar to Xavier, we're also thinking about options to drive like more electrification and demand. And we're also like looking specifically at how to electrify industrial sectors. And up to like 90% of like current industrial energy demand can actually be electrified, which leads like lower costs, much stronger resilience to price shocks, like on the LNG market, for instance, and huge flexibility for the power system. So it's pretty essential. We're also looking at ways to do that. So we're also considering like the electrification bank, which would build on the idea of a hydrogen bank to make it really a European supply chain and kind of a European solution to what has been like very fragmented problems so far. We're also looking at like governance structures for collaboration. I think there's a lot of potential there, and I'll ask about the specific timing later on how to implement that. But I think that is I wouldn't call it quite a low-hanging fruit because it's not going to be that easy, but it is one thing we haven't done yet and could yield like significant benefits. Maybe one thing that, I mean, building on what Albinas was sharing, like I think we've clearly been working a lot on energy security, so I wouldn't call it a gap, but I think there's probably need to be a reset or a rethink now that feeling of energy crisis is over. Because despite like very good progress on like with Repower EU on like renewables and energy efficiency, like the main focus has still been to kind of diversify gas supply. So it leaves us still very dependent on, in some places like LNG from Russia, but like also just volatile LNG markets. And we know that during the height of the crisis, like governments had to spend like billions to help like households and industries with impossible energy bills. If this was to happen again, this would be a total fiscal disaster that would basically make like very scarce like public resources compete for each other. And like you could see trade-off between like healthcare and energy bills, like we started seeing. And I mean, I think it doesn't take a lot of imagination to imagine what could be the next crisis. I think water resilience comes to mind, for instance, in particular in areas of like heat waves and droughts, if you're really dependent on like hydro or nuclear or other technology. So we do need to be a lot more aware of this. And for this, it does need to kind of rethink about not only energy security in terms of diversification, but also really including that demand side element and probably kind of refocusing on how to do this in buildings. There's a few solutions on how to do it on the ground, and clearly implementation of the Green Deal is a big thing, but there's probably thinking of like the funding element, also like just the industrial element. There's a lot of leadership we can still extract from like heat pumps or like industrial heat processes that could also lead, like have benefits on the competitiveness side of things. So I think that's maybe one area that does need to be thought through. And maybe if I can have 1 second, again, on like another aspect of resilience is the focus on climate impacts. So there's a lot of good hooks in the mission letters, like in the job specs of the upcoming commissioners. And there's a lot of, like a really strong body of work from the EEA or the Commission DG Klima on what could happen. Specifically in energy, the first step really is about planning and kind of testing better. We have basically now a lot of data about kind of climate risk scenarios, climate impacts, and we have like a fairly good planning processes when it comes to like cross-border infrastructure or kind of system testing like the resilience of the energy grid. These two don't completely connect. So when we plan for like the next Connecting Europe facility, which I'm glad to hear you'll kind of argue for, does need to be kind of very critical about where the climate risks are, and when we are planning our systems, being very aware of like the risk of like intense flooding, intense like heat and droughts, because it will impact the energy system in ways we haven't seen yet, and that's something that will be important to do.
No, indeed, I think there's that sense, and I'm glad that you're bringing that point in, is that, you know, look what it's like now. You know, right now here in Brussels, unheard of simply, and we're going to get more of that. Places like Spain and other, let's say, warmer countries, their water reservoirs are empty. There's just no water. So there's a water crisis, on the horizon, and public debt is the highest it's ever been. For governments. So there's a kind of a real sense that if anything else hits us, boy, we really are going to be buggered, and resilience is going to have to be the order of the day. Thank you very much for those points you're making. I suppose, what do you think about the electrification bank coming out as an idea? Is it something that's, you know, worth thinking about, or do you want to know more about it? We have five or so minutes. Back to you in terms of any questions or reactions to what you've heard. Gentlemen there, thank you very much. And gentlemen here, and some women as well, please. Please introduce yourself.
Miran Pletersky, I'm an advisor, and I would just like
You're
to
advisor to?
Financial companies.
Okay.
I would just like to ask Xavier Ursat and Bernd Warner about what would be ideal circumstances that would stimulate construction of connection lines, and how could you envisage it, make it bankable, easily to finance, not only by public sources, by governments, but also by financial sector or private sources. And the second question would be to all, or who could take up the question, is it what would be the price of the energy? It's for private consumers and for the companies, so as for European economy and also private consumers to stay competitive.
Can you explain a little bit about what you mean by private consumers in terms of pricing?
People consuming, because if
so
they
no,
are
I was
going
thinking you
to
might go in
spend
that,
too
you know,
much
the
for
private sector should be charged a different tariff, and, you know, people who are at home should have a different tariff, for example.
Yeah,
You're not going there. Okay.
But at the end, I'm not asking about this distinction. I'm asking about the level of prices, because first, people who will, individuals will not be able to consume on something else. The turnover in economy will slow down. If the price of energy is too high, consumption will slow down. But at the other hand, the companies will not be competitive if they will continue paying 3 times the price of energy as, or 2.5 times as they pay in the United States.
Thank you. But as you're a financial advisor yourself, what's the answer to your own question? What's the solution? Am I being too...
I used to be a policymaker, now I'm not. This is why I'm asking this question.
All right. Good way out, good segue out. Gentleman here. Francesca, just over here, just at the front. Oh. Thank you.
Thank you. Antti Kohopa from Finnish Energy, representing Finland-based energy companies. And thanks for the good event and good interventions from many different aspects. I would like to bring one more aspect to this discussion, because we talk about competitiveness a lot, and in your introductory remarks you mentioned that these high prices and volatility is some kind of market failure. But if we look at Nordics and if we look at Finland, we have now basically clean electricity system. So all production is coming, near all production is coming from renewables and nuclear and clean sources. We have lowest or second lowest prices within EU area. We have highest volatility at the moment. And when we look at the price comparisons in Draghi report, they compare US-China to EU average or some individual big member states. But if you would put Finland and Sweden together with those price charts, we would be totally competitive with China and US. And in these countries, we have implemented all EU market rules. We have best functioning electricity markets.
Mm-hmm. So what's your question?
So my question is that is the failure in the EU legislation, is the market failure in the way how some member states, quite many member states, have implemented the EU legislation? Or is the failure in the national policies which these countries have made?
Okay,
Because
so
this is quite important distinction.
indeed, absolutely, you're quite right to bring. But is this just classic Finnish enlightenment, or did something happen? What made it happen, from your perspective?
How long answer you would like to have?
I'd like a simple answer. No, because you segmented what you think are the issues. Is it all those three things? The political leadership, behaviours, the implementation of policy?
I would say that we have been trusting on the market, or before the crisis, but also in the crisis and after crisis. So we have given, and our policymakers have given market to freedom to deliver what market needs: emission reductions, electricity when and where it's needed, and that kind of things.
Okay.
It's part of political leadership. Obviously, it's a bit of geographic as well.
Indeed.
But many that kind of.
Thank you for bringing that. Now, if you pass the mic straight next to you.
Thank you so much.
Introduce yourself.
My name is Uvomila, CEO and co-founder of Plan A, and also co-founder of the Green Tech Alliance, where we have a consortium of more than 3,500 green tech companies addressing different challenges related to climate change. We spoke very little about technology beyond maybe kind of renewables. It would be fantastic to understand if we know that 70% of decarbonization of the EU can be achieved with new technology, even storage and further battery activities. I can speak also to the work that we do. How do you see this progressing, and what do you think is the role of the stakeholder being involved in these discussions? Thank you.
Thank you. We've run out of time, so I'm going to first go, Xavier, if I can turn to you first about the question about how you finance this kind of demand side, but also the question is that about pricing. So if you could take both of those elements, that would be helpful.
The question about the lines, the private lines, yes. I think that we see a number of situations in which we may be able to organize a private financing for new lines, and especially if we need grid consumers such as big data centers and kind of facility like this, around 1 gigawatt, let's say 1 gigawatt consumption, that needs affordable clean energy on the long run. We may be in a position to organize a private financing on those topics alongside with PPA lasting for 30 or 40 years. And behind the question of our friends from Finland, I think there's something missing in the discussion sometimes, which is how do we organize in each country or at a regional level an electrical system which is cost effective. And a cost-effective electrical system is a system which is betting on every technologies and which has a part of dispatchable low-carbon electricity, because without dispatchable low-carbon electricity, we will have very costly electricity systems in Europe. I think at the moment, it's not a difficulty. We are at the beginning. But if we continue on this range, betting on the fact that we put electricity on the grid and we will see afterwards how we manage it, in 10 years' time, we'll be into trouble. So I think that thinking about what is a cost-effective electricity system is key. It's not a question of European rules. It's not a question of regulation. It's a question of electricity strategy inside each country.
And do you see that coming from Mechtil's end? So is it the Commission that should the Commission lead this corralling together? Because otherwise you just leave it to the market to say, actually, let's see if the willing will collaborate.
I will let her answer, but I think it's a kind of discussion between you and each country or each big operator in Europe.
Yes, I think it's very good to hear, obviously, from member states. It depends on how they implement, and Finland is definitely a leader and others. But it depends also, as you said, at the end, the geographical situation and the energy mix. Finland and others are lucky to have a lot of hydropower, a lot of renewables, a lot of nuclear investments. So a very low carbon mix, they use it. Other member states have not the same options. So we are looking often at regions, and right now we look also in particular in Southeast Europe, just to mention where there have been in summer some price spikes for different reasons. Some is droughts, some is not being well connected, some is not having the flexibility, storages installed. So we are looking at short-term and medium-term solution. So I think it's a bit of a double strategy. First, a national one and the implementation and the energy mix decided by the member states. But there is a lot of cost optimization at a European view.
Or even a sub-regional level, because the message that we're hearing...
We have regional groups, just to be sure. We have Southwest Europe, Southeast, we have BEMIP for the Baltics, we have, what is missing, Southwest. So we have these groups where we discuss interconnection, renewables development, energy efficiency. I'm going to Budapest for the CESEC, so in 10 days, where we discuss not only, by the way, with EU, but also neighboring non-EU energy community contract in Ukraine, Moldova as part of it. So, I mean, we have regional groups, and that works rather well. We might strengthen them. But there's also cost optimization at the EU level. I mean, when we speak at LNG interconnectors, there are plenty of examples what we can do.
Well, we haven't even talked about joint procurement and the potential for joint procurement to be such a cost saver. Do you want to say the last few words before I come to the end of this conversation?
Please. Thanks very much. I mean, maybe to take on this last question on innovation in particular, I mean, I think we definitely see that this for sure needs to be is a big part of transitions going forward. If we're thinking about the renewable space, we have advanced wind turbines, offshore wind, floating offshore wind will be an important technology that's coming along. Within low carbon, also nuclear power, so particularly small modular reactors. And that development can open up new opportunities there. So we need to be investing in innovation across many spaces, not just on supply though. I mean, grids we've talked about, but digital technologies, smart grids, actually operating them is really essential to manage a more variable system, a more flexible system in the future. And I think that a key point there is also on the demand side. Electric vehicles, we've talked a lot about growing, but the cost reductions there are also through innovation. So having more affordable electric vehicles can accelerate the electrification side. Heat pumps that perform better and are at lower cost is another critical element on the demand side. So there are a lot of opportunities coming.
Yeah, but that will require some form of, state intervention, no? Because otherwise, we've been waiting for electric cars to go down in price, but they're not. And now what's happening is the Chinese are bringing in power to their elbow, MG as a brand, which is now everywhere being sold as a brand of Europe to bypass the tariff, if you like. We're not seeing the heat pumps being developed at the price that we need, but you need some form of government intervention, no?
I mean, to get this, certainly to kickstart the market, I think this is a very critical part, and we do see those programs. And so I think these technologies are coming down in cost. And so having the commercialization of them, having it at lower cost, that's what really opens up the big growth in the future.
I can't bring those of you who are kind of squinting at responses so far, but we'll have it at the next session, don't worry. So I want to thank you very much. I want to come to Albina last. But Manu, do you want to say anything in particular to respond to any of your points before I end with the Minister? You don't have to.
No, it's just a lot of thoughts. I mean, I think I feel triggered to answer to the cost effectiveness and the market will decide point. I'm just not sure which angle to take, because I think it's been very flawed, and I'm really glad that it works in Finland. But I think first we have the challenge that for the market to work, you do need to have the right signals. So that's why we started with ETS, but that's not enough for R&D, that's not enough for energy efficiency. So you keep having to correct it. So I think for me, this was one of the things coming out of the Draghi report as well, is that we had a phase where maybe intervention is more okay than it was, because we don't have the time and we need a bit more direction. And secondly, I mean, the concern right now is also just on the political economy. If the market, and sorry for saying, but if the market was to decide, I don't know that we would keep a very good car manufacturing industry in Europe. They didn't invest in electric cars in time.
Exactly.
And now there are maybe better products coming from elsewhere. But
Precisely.
we can't afford to just lose that industry. So that's where it's not really a market signal, it's also a decision on industrial policy. And I think we have to accept that we have to make choices. Technology neutrality maybe in some aspects, but we do have to make better choices to achieve a fair and fast and funded transition. So I think, yeah. Maybe
I'm glad you're saying that because, the laissez-faire approach to the market hasn't really got us very far to this date. We need a more managed interventionist market approach. Minister, if I may, do your eyes water when you hear about the Finnish example and think, oh my goodness, what's your reaction to what you've heard so far? Because I want to end with you because you made some very powerful comments about where you sit so close to the fire, and it's a good reminder to all of us that, we need to be aware of that.
Well, Finland is my favorite country. That was my first diplomatic posting back in '97. But coming back seriously, 2 points. First, we still underinvest. And it is obvious that we need to invest smarter. So when we see situation that, huge development of solar energy happens and that creates congestion, and then we need to build new lines, is that a good policy? No. So good planning, smart investment, but continue investing. Second one, I am very glad that some people mentioned dispatchable energy, which is needed, and I think industry, data centers, and everything else is about dispatchable energy. Whether we can turn, renewable energy into real dispatchable energy, that is, we are not there yet. Be frank, let us be frank with us. So, I hear those messages that we should connect grids and that would make magic. No. Connection of grids will not make magic if systems that are connected are not balanced. So we still have a role to play at a national, regional level to balance our systems, to make them resilient, robust, and then while connecting them, we could achieve a real energy transition and prosperity for all. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you very much. Clearly, the message coming out here is that we need, as Xavier said and all of you have said, is an electrification strategy, MECTID. So we look forward to that as a part of your, the remit of what happens next year and the tail end of this year. Colleagues, I've eaten 10 minutes into your half-hour break. I do apologise, and but there's lots of sandwiches and coffee out there. Just want to end in the fact that we spoke to 2,024 citizens last year. As a part of this, you can see the cards here and you can download the report. And we asked them about their concerns and feelings around, climate change and energy, etc. And everyone was really clear. It was quite interesting, regardless of the marketplace, so 7 countries across Europe, most of the citizens believe that actually the solutions are there. They actually believe that there are solutions for tackling climate change are there. They just didn't trust the politicians and vested interest to do the right thing. So kind of a powerful message. I wanted to start with citizens and end with citizens. So please do get a chance to look at that. Do come back here and basically after the break, you come back here at 12:15 and we'll continue the conversation. And what we promise for you in the next session is that we're going to start with kind of, I suppose, poking the eye of received wisdom with a stick to say, we're going to start with the art of the possible. So I'm just whetting your appetite that we've got an example of entrepreneurship and an idea that could be scaled up in Europe. And we're going to challenge this panel of commissioners and others to say, why can't this happen? So look forward to that, please, and do come back. Thank you very much, and thank you for being a fabulous audience, but thank you as a panel of speakers for being also good. People, the coffees and teas are.
Second session, you have to finish it at 1:30 max because there's another event and I have to change everything here.
Yeah. Welcome back, or welcome to those of you who are joining us for the first time for the second session of our annual Climate Energy Summit, where we're looking at the future of energy policy, what we need to be thinking about, what investments we should be thinking about, and how do we make sure that it's both secure and just. This second session is going to be preceded by an idea sharing, which I'll go into in a moment, but the second sharing is very much about how do we think about competitiveness as not being a trade-off with anything else. And being, in terms of, there doesn't need to be a trade-off between competitiveness and having a greener environment and a just environment. So that's what we'll be delving into in the second session. But to begin with, Heidi, thank you. Very well welcome to you. Heidi is one of our European young leaders and is a glaciologist. And what we're doing, the purpose of this is to kind of set a context for the conversation we've been having both before and we're about to have this afternoon. Connecting climate science and policy. Heidi, lovely to see you. Over to you.
See you as well. Thank you so very much for the invitation. I'm really honored to open this session with you today. So as you can understand, my job is to study these incredible environments. I study snow and ice around the world. And today I work with AMAP, the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program, which is one of the working groups to the Arctic Council. As you can imagine, snow and ice are environments that respond extremely rapidly to our carbon emissions. Speaking of carbon emissions, I wanted to show you this study that I'm sure you've seen before from the 1970s. In the 1970s, there were incredible scientists who knew very well that the more fossil fuels we burn, the more carbon emissions we will emit and the more temperatures we're going to increase. And so the graph, this kind of old school graph you can see here on the right-hand side, shows you the connection between increasing CO2 emissions and increasing temperatures. And back in the 70s, the scientists defined this trajectory that we could take if we were to continue burning fossil fuels on Earth. And what is quite incredible when you see this graph from the 70s is that today, in October 2024, we are bang on the middle of the trajectory in terms of CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere and in terms of temperature increase. And the reason why I'm showing you this graph is, of course, because this graph, as you probably already know, is from ExxonMobil. And so back in the 1970s, they had two options, either to listen to scientists and maybe reconsider their business plan, or to bury this internal report and launch a global misinformation campaign, which is what they decided to do. And so today we have continued using fossil fuels to the extent that our climate is now profoundly disturbed. This is an animation from NASA that you can actually all find on YouTube, showing you how temperatures on Earth have evolved for the past few decades, taking for reference the decades from the 1970s to the 80s. Everything that is blue is colder, everything that is orange and red is, of course, warmer. And unfortunately for us in Europe, we are currently the continent that warms the fastest on Earth, along with the polar regions, the Arctic in the north, the Antarctic in the south, that are also warming extremely rapidly. So, of course, in response to this, snow and ice around the world is quickly disappearing. And I wanted to tell you a little bit of a story from my family regarding this. So the lady you can see on the left-hand side is actually my great-grandmother. This is a picture that dates back from 1916. And at the time, it was actually the beginning of tourism in the French Alps. I was lucky to grow up in the same environment. And just like her, I've always been fascinated by snow and ice. And in 1916, she decided to travel for a couple of days to stand on the glacier and to get her picture taken. And today I still do that. You know, I take a lot of classrooms, a lot of students to the glaciers in France, to the glaciers of the Alps. But this is what this very glacier, the Mer de Glace, actually looks like today. There is not much left of it. The glacier is responding extremely rapidly to climate change. And these glaciers are still very much assets of our economies. You know, in Europe, we still depend on the fresh water coming from these glaciers during the summer months. We use this fresh water for drinking, for sanitation. We use this fresh water to produce hydroelectricity. We use it for agriculture. In my country, we'll also use it to cool down nuclear power plants. And if you zoom out a little bit, in the world, it is 2 billion people who use fresh water from glaciers seasonally. So most likely during the summer months or during the warm season. So it's a quarter of humanity who relies on the presence and on the health of these glaciers today. But of course, if we continue extracting and burning fossil fuels, we will see these glaciers disappear, at least most of them, during the next few decades. So we have a choice, how much glaciers do we want to keep for future generations? How much water do we want to keep in these mountains for the years and decades to come? So this afternoon, I wanted to make you travel a little bit to a place that I love very, very much, where I spend actually most of the year, which is the Arctic. So this is where the North Pole is. And unfortunately, the Arctic is the fastest warming place on Earth today. The place where I live, which is the little archipelago of Svalbard, actually close to Greenland, has warmed by 8 degrees since the 1980s, and it's due to basically the disappearance of the Arctic sea ice, which is what you can see here on the graph. In 40 years, we've lost about 40 to 45% of Arctic sea ice, and unfortunately, we very much depend on the presence of Arctic sea ice. It's a very wide surface that basically reflects solar radiation back into space. But as you can see on the video here, which is a reconstruction from NASA, sea ice is very much affected by the increasing ocean temperatures, but also air temperatures. And the latest scientific studies show us that it might actually be too late to save Arctic sea ice today. It may be just a question of time until we see some summer months in the Arctic when it's sunny 24 hours a day without any more sea ice. And the consequences will be very dramatic. First of all, we're removing this white blanket over a very dark ocean. So it will catalyze the warming of the Arctic, melting Greenland, thawing permafrost, melting ice caps and glaciers even faster, affecting the 7 million people who live in the Arctic. But also we're starting to recognize that this will heavily disturb weather patterns in mid-latitudes. So weather patterns in Canada, in the US, weather patterns all across Europe, and weather patterns also in Asia. And we're already suffering from extreme weather events that are directly related to the melting of the Arctic sea ice. It's not just sea ice that is responding very heavily, very strongly to the burning of fossil fuels. It's also our ice sheets. We have 2 ice sheets on Earth, Greenland on the left, Antarctica on the right. Both of these ice sheets taken together hold enough ice to increase sea levels by 65 meters. 65 meters. Currently, Greenland loses about 30 million tons of ice every hour, year-round. And the consequences, well, you know them already, is sea level rise, among other things. But sea level rise is a very important topic in Europe. This is what Europe looks like, at least parts of Europe look like, with a 1 meter increase in sea level rise. This could very well happen this century. This could very well happen before the end of the century. If we continue to see greenhouse gas emissions increasing in the atmosphere every year, we could get a meter of sea level rise as early as the 2070s. But it's really up to us to decide how quickly do we want 1 meter of sea level rise to occur. And as you can see, it is actually very vast portions of Europe that will be so terribly affected. And this is something we have to prepare for today. We won't wake up in 2069 realizing that sea level is coming. This is, again, something that we have to deeply anticipate. The last part of the cryosphere I wanted to tell you about this morning is permafrost, because permafrost is always a little bit mysterious. Permafrost is the frozen ground. In the Northern Hemisphere, actually 23% of the land mass of the Northern Hemisphere is permafrost. So we have a lot of it, and permafrost is frozen. So of course, as temperatures increase, permafrost starts to thaw. And the more it thaws, the more it releases its own greenhouse gases, CO2 and methane, depending on the availability of oxygen. Currently, right now, permafrost is already emitting as much greenhouse gases as Japan, which is the 7th largest emitter in the world. But we can do a lot worse than this. So if we continue burning fossil fuels and seeing greenhouse gas emissions increase in the atmosphere and reach 1.6 degrees of temperature increase, permafrost will emit as much as India. So just to make myself clear, it would be as if we were adding another India in the world. If we reach 2 degrees, it would be as if we would add another EU in the world, and 3 degrees is as if we were doubling the US. So it's a very, very serious topic, and the more permafrost thaw, the more we must be ambitious about our targets of greenhouse gas emissions. I will leave you with this graph here, which is to me probably the most important one to keep in mind when we think about climate and when we think about energy. It's a graph based on a study that was published in 2022 in Science magazine, and The Guardian made this very easily, hopefully understandable graph. It's basically the graph of our climate tipping points. On the left-hand side, you have a series of ecosystems. I will start with the first one, Greenland. Greenland that holds enough ice to increase sea levels by 6 to 7 meters. It appears that the tipping point of Greenland, which is here represented with a little red dot, is around 1.5 degrees. There's been more studies released since 2022 showing that it might be actually a bit closer to 2 degrees. Let's hope so. But it means that, considering, of course, margins of error, which is the red horizontal bars, that once we go beyond 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees, but for at least a few years or at least a few decades, Greenland will start to collapse. And no matter what we do in the future, Greenland will continue to collapse. So this is a very important reasoning, a very important mechanism to understand that our climate is not like, oh, the warmer it gets, the more the ice melts, but as soon as we start decreasing temperature, the ice will be healthy again. It doesn't work like this for all our ecosystems, at least for Greenland, for parts of Antarctica. If we go beyond certain temperatures, it will be too late to save these ecosystems, which calls for really ambitious adaptation, but also calls for extremely strong and efficient mitigation. So I will stop right there. I thank you again for your very kind invitation, and I wish you really enriching debates and discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. As ever, you're brilliant, and you're able to kind of project this information with a smile and a sense of optimism in your heart. And, all of us are thinking, oh, bugger, we're doomed. But, as what we like to do at Friends of Europe, and we deliberately wanted to showcase this idea sharing from Heidi to kind of, I suppose, it's not a rude awakening because we should know a lot of this, but it's providing you with an opportunity to peek into the future if we continue to do as we are. And Heidi's challenge is, as you quite rightly say, we need to up the ambition, but don't think it's mañana because there is no mañana on this agenda. So I wish that, you could be at the council meeting presenting this, to leaders so they actually see what's ahead of them. And, good luck to you and thank you for, as ever, promoting your message, especially I know you do a lot with children, young people and students. And, as a European leader, we've made sure, and we hope to work with you again to make sure that you're in this kind of audience so that we're able to get the message across. Thank you very much again, Heidi.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
And thank you again for doing this. Can I ask our panelists to please take the seats? Monica, are you texting Ursula von der Leyen to look at the video? I need you to take the seat too.
I'm actually looking for some figures.
Okay, please. So, as the title suggests, is there a contradiction in terms? Is there a trade-off? What do we need to do that now we've got this report, an author's letter, and Draghi being quoted everywhere with a similar message about, scale up, speed up, and do it in a just way to be competitive. So this session is really about how can we do that and make sure there isn't a trade-off between being competitive and the Green Deal. It doesn't have to be that way, we know that, but we want to be able to bring to bear a conversation, a dialogue, and some insights into how we might do that. Now, Draghi talks about the need to create much more homegrown entities that are competitive globally, and we need to scale them up, and we need to do R&D more if it's going to be the backbone, it has to be the backbone of innovation that we can then scale to another level. And you know, there are many who've been coming up with ideas in Europe over the past 20, 30 years, but often the conditions in US and China are better for them in terms of speed, agility, and investment, which we don't have here in the same manner in Europe. So I'm going to start with, and as I mentioned, those of you who were at the first session, with an opportunity. And this is not, don't worry, the person I'm about to bring into the conversation doesn't fund us. Not yet, or a partner, but is someone who's come up with there's an idea. It's about that opportunity to have something which can be readily scaled up, and it's based in Catania, of all places, in Sicily. So I'm, Stefano, really pleased to have you with us. Would you please first explain what does 3Sun do? And then we can talk about what your idea is.
Yeah, thanks, Dharmendra, for inviting me today, and good morning, everybody. First of all, I'm a very lucky CEO to run a company which is called 3Sun in Catania, which is, by the way, a wonderful place if you haven't been there yet. But more importantly, why I'm lucky, because we've been given the resources from our shareholder, Enel, and also debt holder, Innovation Fund, to build a gigafactory of cell and modules in Catania. And it's quite, I think this could be a very important experiment for what Europe might want to do in order to reshore a portion of the PV supply chain in Europe. A technology, PV, which was invented in Europe but disappeared over the last 15 years, almost entirely, both cells and modules. And I use the word experiment. This is a huge experiment. And this is a little bit the challenge I'm facing every day with my team. We are trying to make, living together, the challenge is living together the startup and the innovation and the size of a company like 3Sun, which will produce 3 gigawatt PV cells and modules per year. The experiment size in terms of investment is close to 1 billion euros, so it's a huge ticket that our shareholder and debt holder gave to us, and we have been using this money to build a factory which is 150 square meter, 1,000 square meter, full of machinery, which will be able to scale to 3 gigawatt. 3 gigawatt, to give you an idea, is 14,000 panels per day, 800,000 cells, the bricks that are composing forming a panel per day, a panel every 6 seconds, something quite impressive in Italy for sure, and I struggle to find similar, in other industries, a similar scale in terms of number of pieces done per day. And why Catania? You probably ask yourself. It's a nice place, but it's because in Catania, actually, a few years back, a group of very talented R&D people, formerly coming from the semiconductor industry, former employees of ST Microelectronics, which is also has a very large factory in Catania, invented, quote unquote, a new technology for doing PV modules. This technology is called heterojunction technology, and it uses a combination of amorphous silicon together with silicon, which allows this platform, this technology platform, to provide unparalleled performances in terms of efficiency, but also durability, performances in hot temperatures. And what we are doing, and that's, I love to use the word startup, although we are a gigafactory, because we are doing what normally startups do. They try to leapfrog. Today, everybody knows 90% of the production, global production, is done in China. The technologies are PER, TOPCon, and these big guys, the big manufacturer, Chinese manufacturer, have invested a lot of money. And they will evolve to new technologies like AGT, no doubt, but using an evolution. So as every startup, we have no legacy. So we have the chance to be faster. And that's what we are betting on doing it. We're using HJT. We will already, and we start production last month, so the first few megawatts are already ready to be shipped to our first customer. Our modules will have 24% efficiency, and we are already working on this HJT platform to get us to the 30%, which is something that will happen in the next couple of years. But we think we could be the first because lack of legacy, because we are thinking as a startup. And I think this is something that could be replicated in Europe, quite frankly. And there is a time window for doing this. So we need to rush. And in order to make this possible, we need to have the proper regulatory framework to sustain this business. Because although our technology is more efficient, naturally, we cannot compete with the cost structure that the big Chinese giants have today, both for structural reasons and also because the China state government awarded hundreds of billions of support in the last years. So we need help somehow from Europe to be sustainable as TRISAN, but more importantly, perhaps, to, if we really believe in reshoring a portion of the PV supply chain, in making possible for other companies to get started and follow our example. We are speaking with a number of people who are planning already in France, in Germany, but today, quite frankly, the fundraising, that it's almost impossible unless we make some incentive scheme or we find some mechanism like the NZIA and the non-price criteria that will make this challenge possible. So I'm here today to really ask to my colleagues here in the panel how this can be made possible, and especially how can be done real quick, because the time opportunity is really in front of us and is now.
Thank you very much. So you've gone beyond proof of concept. It's there. It's a total doable entity. Can you explain a couple of things? One is why the time window that you're suggesting. Secondly, do you believe that there is a scale-up opportunity? Do you actually have the sense that there are people and partners out there that are really ready to step up? And then thirdly, what do you need from the Commission?
Yeah. So first of all, the time window in technology, I come from telecom actually, so it's the same thing. Every industry goes through cycles. It's like if you think about telecommunication, 2G, 3G, 4G, and so on. And the incumbents have a natural tendency to go for an evolutionary path because they need to amortize as much as possible the investment they did. And that's the role of startups. Startups don't have legacy, and they can leapfrog and position themselves on the next cycle. Chinese, they will get and they will catch us up in a number of years. That's why I'm saying the opportunity is now. For first question. The second question is, if I think about Europe and how Europe could get to, I think a target that was that we gave to ourselves, if I remember correctly, was to have at least 30 gigawatts produced in Europe. To get there, not necessarily we will need to have 10, TRISAN is 3 gigawatt cells and modules, but not necessarily we need to think about 10 TRISAN, but we could think about perhaps a more effective and efficient way of doing this. And looking at the map of Europe, if I could say that, I will try and see where I have skills and talents, for instance, about semiconductor, and like we do have in Catania, and there to put money for doing cell. Where do I have water or green electricity in abundance for doing wafer? And I'll probably put that in the north of Europe. Where can I do assembly? Assembly can be done almost everywhere, in every country where there is automation knowledge. And those factories could be fed by us and other cell producer. So it needs a little bit of scheme and strategy in order to make the 30 gigawatt achievable. But at the end of the day, today, we had a lot of support from the Italian government, so we are starting our commercial operation. We can only sell to a piece of the market which today is incentivized. If I go and compete in the utility scale market, for instance, which is not incentivized, I cannot do that. The more I sell, the more money I lose. So this is not sustainable. And that's what we need. We need to have an incentive framework. In USA, they have done the IRA, they've done different things. I'm not an expert on how to do it, but for sure, if we don't succeed in finding the right mix of mechanisms, protection, incentive, tax deduction, you name them, this challenge as Europe will fail. And Tristan will have his own troubles. I mean, we're lucky we have Enel backing us up, but you will certainly not succeed alone.
Stefano, thank you very much. And here we are, an example of a technology that we're actually ahead of the Chinese for once, which is, we have been before, but they've basically been able to scale better than the Europeans have. And here's a great opportunity to do something at scale, at speed, exactly in line with the Draghi report. So, Kurt, if I may, Director General at DG Klima. And so I won't ask you to respond to this first, because I will ask you how, we wanted to make this a live case study of how do you really get to the point where you have the idea, it's scoped out, it has potential, it has a market return, and actually responds to Europe's needs. How does the EU then step up to do that? But before that, can you just say a little bit about, do you feel now with the adjustments being made by this upcoming new mandate and the kind of approach Ursula von der Leyen is taking, do you feel there's much more coherence and we've got the right structures in place to be able to move faster and with greater ambition?
I'll answer your questions, no doubt about this, but first I want to say how grateful I am for the presentation by Heidi, the science side, which we should never lose out of sight. And I'm very pleased to come after the presentation by Tristan. What I hear in both presentations is urgency, sense of urgency, ecologically, but also economically. It's a pleasure to come after the Tristan presentation because, as it was mentioned, with the Innovation Fund, together with the European Investment Bank, we are proud, if I may say, shareholders in the project. We are providing 100 million euros of grant funding, I believe. And it shows the power of supporting breakthrough innovation from the European level. Next week, on the 22nd of October, we will publish the latest results from the last call of the Innovation Fund. It's, I can say, beautiful. We have a call out for more than 4 billion euros. And what we see with the projects that we get is that we cover a lot of ground to create this kind of ecosystems in renewables, in industrial decarbonization, in clean tech. But we go further than that. We increasingly also support the scale-up of manufacturing, the deployment of green products and clean tech. And we're experimenting also now with auctions where we subsidize the production of green products at a very cost-competitive level because it's competition at European level. Actually, much more cost-efficient than what the US has with the IRA. The issue is that our calls are 6 times oversubscribed. The auctions are 15 times oversubscribed, which is, of course, a pity. Because we can't fund all these projects, but it gives us an incredible sense of encouragement because the projects are there. 10 years ago, Mr. Juncker launched the Juncker Fund. He made the right analysis that we needed investment, but we had no projects. We had to look for projects everywhere. Today, the pipeline of projects is overwhelming, but we now need to bring the money to these projects, not only public, but also private money. And that's why we are now putting forward to the member states that we do these auctions and grants as a service, so that we set up the system at European level, and we invite member states to top up with their resources. We grant them ex-ante state aid clearance, so everything goes very quickly. And in this way, we can have a tool for green industrial policy that is not the 40 billion we have, but hundreds of billions, because it's scalable ad infinitum. So all this allows me to say that we're actually not doing badly in Europe. We are on track. We are systematically decoupling our emissions from economic growth. Unemployment is at a historic low. Investments in Europe have tripled over the last 5 years. Even our trade surplus is big as never before. And our manufacturing index doesn't look badly compared to the United States. We have two problems. One is our energy-intensive industries are suffering and hurting a lot, not because of climate policy, but because of high energy prices, because of our dependence on fossil fuels. That's where the renewables are, and energy efficiency are a big part of the solution. And secondly, of course, because of market conditions in Europe and globally. The second problem we have is that others are doing more and quicker than we. China was mentioned. The scale, the scope, the speed with which Chinese and also Americans now are moving in this space is really giving us a lot to fear from. So we need to get our act together. That means that we need to stay the course on the Green Deal. We may call it less green and more clean, but we need to stay the course. And there, I must say, to answer your question, we are very encouraged by the new setup of the European Commission. I believe the stars are aligned. The commissioners in charge of the Green Deal at large really get along very well. Mr. Hoekstra, Mrs. Ribera, Mr. Jorgensen, and Mrs. Roswell, who cover the main portfolios that relate to the Green Deal. But obviously what matters now for us is that we go beyond this. And I believe what Mr. Draghi said in his report is very true. Decarbonization must and can be a driver of competitiveness and of growth, provided, he added, that's a very important conditions, that all conditions, all policies are aligned. And that's what we have ahead of us as a task. So for us to conclude, what it means is we need to concentrate on what I call the 4 I's. Implementing what we have agreed for 2030, not adding rules, simplify where possible.
Great, we were saying that earlier. Great, go on.
Implement. We now need to do it. Secondly, industrial strategy. That needs to complement the Green Deal and our climate agenda. This, ladies and gentlemen, can only make sense if it is European. There's no sense in having 27 industrial strategies, because I very much agree the power and potential of Europe is smart specialization, that not everyone is trying to do the same thing. The third I is the I of investment, and that's why we team up so much with our friends from the European Investment Bank. The investments we need are massive, but not unprecedented. It's the level of investments that Europe had in the 1970s, basically. That's what we need to repeat again. And third is international. There is a global race to net zero. We need to make sure that the level playing field is there globally, and that we have the right ways to nurture and treasure the innovation and scale up in Europe. And we're starting to do this now with the NZR resilience criteria. And for example, in the new auction we do on renewable hydrogen, we have resilience criteria, which mean that a project can only source 25% of electrolyzers from China. There's a cap on it. We will never close our market. We are an open economy. But we will be much more vigilant to where there are risks of over-dependence on certain partners in the world. And that's where we will act.
Great. So, I mean, I take your point about the fact that things have improved in terms on various indicators that you suggested, Kurt, but if I can say with all due respect, if you start from a very low base, it looks good 10 years later. Sorry, but that's the case. Because we know that the R&D investment in Europe is far below China, Japan, and the US, and we need to upscale it. And I was saying in the opening session, we have the largest R&D fund in the world, which is Horizon. There's something about how do you, it goes to your point about alignment. You say the commissioners and the vice president are really aligned, but the job of how you deal with the market, so the pricing market, what will you do about, what can you do about that? But then specifically, what can you do to help 3Sun to do what it needs to do in speed and scale it up?
Well, I think first on R&D, we are improving, and we have countries in the European Union that are doing better in terms of R&D per GDP than the United States. Notably Belgium. Yeah. This is not known, but Belgium is investing more in R&D as a proportion of GDP than the United States, for example. And it's been improving too slowly. Again, it's too slow. Secondly, we need finance. I think we have the regulation that it takes. We need to simplify or do regulatory hygiene where possible. We're conscious of this, but it's the finance part that we now need to find so that we can finance all these projects. Thirdly, we need to look at the markets, making sure that the markets are there for green products or new technologies that will have a premium because of the investment. What we can't afford is that we have companies like 3Sun investing in the new generation of PV, but they come to the market at a certain cost. If they are then undercut by other PV offers that are cheaper or that come from abroad under rather unfair conditions, that's of course killing. You don't have a business case anymore. And that's why I'm very happy with President von der Leyen's call in her political guidelines for green lead markets, where from a European level, we start funding this green premium so that the green products come into the market at competitive rates with conventional products. And for this, we're gearing up, again, our innovation fund with auctions to be able to do that. Our budget is way too small. That's why we want to team up with member states so that they bring in their funds as well. ETS revenues, for example, which will run into the hundreds of billions, which need to be invested 100% as of this year in climate and energy. So if we find the right link-up and orchestration, we actually can make a very attractive proposition to our business.
Do you think, I mean, one of the things you've mentioned, it's absolutely critical, it's the regulatory burden and the kind of the state aid thing. So it's great that you're mentioning that you will want to amend state aid guidelines or rules to be able to move things forward. I love your sense of, hygiene regulation, regulatory hygiene. Is that possible in the first 100 days?
In the first 100 days, that will be very difficult because there's nothing more difficult for bureaucrats than reducing regulatory burdens or reporting burdens. But we need to do it. And we will do it. And we will have a president and a Mr. Dombrovskis who will be on our back to do this. So no complacency there. But may I say, first, let's not have an illusion that regulatory simplification will solve it all.
No.
Secondly, we also see with Brexit, for example, or in the United States, absence of regulation is holding up investment. Do you know that there is in the United States no investment flowing to hydrogen because they don't have a definition of green hydrogen? We have one in Europe. The investments are too slow, but they're starting to happen. In the US, nothing for the time being. And thirdly, and I know this is not a very nice message to business circles, but you know, people like us in the Commission, we're not paid per article, number of articles in a law. Very often these regulatory requirements have a certain interest, a certain business audience behind them, which they need in order to make their business case. And we are now confronted actually with very general calls for regulatory simplification, but very specific calls from certain sectors or industry players for adding very precise rules because it helps their business case.
Absolutely. And also, I'd like to hope and think that it's also the values underpinning the union that are shaping the regulation as well, which I had to say that, but hopefully that is the case. It's not just a business-led union. But thank you for that. Very comprehensive and thoughtful. And I think we'll come back into, I have to have a hard stop at 1:30, unfortunately. But I will bring you all in. I want to go to a Member of Parliament now. Because now you've had a private sector, you've had the Commission. Let's go to the, democratic bastion of the EU. Andrea, thank you for joining us. So you've been at committee already, and you need to go back as well after this session. Tell us, what do you think the focus should be right now, and as we approach the new mandate, to, I suppose, build on what Kurt's saying, from a parliamentary point of view, to bolster the economic growth, but also make sure there's jobs, skills adaptation. The bit that you're, in the committee, the industry committee that you're dealing with, is to make sure that it happens in a safe and just way.
Yeah, thank you very much, first of all, for having me and for your attention. And when I look at the title, Climate Energy Summit, what's missing there is the competitiveness work that we would like to work in, and what I would also like to stress, the trust-based regulation that we need, where we trust industry to come along and work in terms of climate action. I'm also glad, as Herr Vandenberg has said, that we've had this impulse at the beginning to set the ground, because as MEP, I'm here for the people and for the interests back in Europe, and to what's been set out in the mission letters, to get the Commission more on the ground, to understand what's happening out there in the nation states, what's happening with the people on the ground. So that's my position as MEP, to advocate for the people, to have a look on how implementation works and to get their interests back to Brussels. Now, we've heard about the need to speed up climate policies, and you've already said we won't manage within 100 days, but I think we need to be very ambitious now, because we've had the introductory interventions saying we don't have time and we need to act. But if we look into the Draghi report, and if I go back into my constituency and talk to companies, and I come from Baden-Württemberg, where there's many energy-intensive companies, small and medium enterprises, there is urgency to act there as well. You talked about jobs, and we talk about deindustrialization. We see the loss of jobs coming especially into my region, where we are independent and dependent on the automotive industry. So there's two urgencies why we need to act. It's first of all, climate protection, but it's also the question of competitiveness, it's jobs, it's the life of people, and that we have to think together why it would have been nice if there would have been climate, energy, and competitive. So to answer
but I just say that this session is about competitiveness.
It's not a contradiction, but it's two main tasks that we have to face in the next 5 years. So now what can we do? We heard that the focus needs to be on implementation. And we're absolutely on board that implementation is one of the key priorities. We do not need more regulation, but we need implementation stability, investment stability. But that also means that now, ahead of a number of delegated acts, implementing acts that we are envisaging, that we have to have a very pragmatic approach. Because what we need is business cases. We've talked a lot about subsidies, investments that we need. But eventually, the companies that are investing need to have a business case at some point. And if you take hydrogen, if you take renewables, eventually the investment that we're doing needs to have a return. And return on investment is important. And if you don't manage to regulate an environment where investments actually involve into a business case, we won't succeed with the transformation of the economy. And that's the core task that we're facing. When you look into the people, it's about energy prices, which is a question of supply and demand. So we need to invest into more energy supply in Europe. You talked about the cost structures for 3Sun. We will only get those cost structures down as well if we have cheaper energy in Europe. That must be one of the top priorities after implementation. We also have to look into, you said we want to keep the markets open, but we do see distortions in the market. We see it in the solar industry. We see it also in the automotive industry now, where the Commission has acted. So we have to be very clear that we need to keep a level playing field also in the area of climate technologies, and that we have to make sure that we set the right incentives for our own industry. Now, we also talked about the question of dependency and de-risking, and that's a very important factor when it comes to fostering technology R&D in Europe, but it also means that we have to invest into security and energy security, because we need stability for investments. And energy security is not only in terms of climate impact, but also in terms of cyber attacks, something we need to invest in order to secure investments in Europe. And one of the most important issues is we need to prioritize. We've seen it, and we talked about bureaucracy over the last mandate, that we need to prioritize legislative efforts in Europe in certain sectors and certain investments. You've talked about the innovation funds that are clearly directed to support the transformation, industrial decarbonization, renewables, and that's exactly the approach that we need. Prioritize certain sectors. The energy sector certainly is one of the key priorities for the next 5 years in order to scale up investments, to create business cases, to have a more pragmatic approach. And when it comes to bureaucracy, I don't quite share your analysis. I do meet a lot of small and medium enterprises and even larger companies that are clearly having a competitive disadvantage because of the bureaucratic burden. So we need to get that burden down, and it won't be in the first 100 days, but let's make it 200 days. That's an important objective.
Well, thank you very much for that. And also, on that last point, it might be about proportionality. You know, what should the burden of regulation be on SMEs, which I'm talking about the small end, versus the larger companies? And, you know, we don't think about proportionality in regulation in that way. We just have a one-size-fits-all type of approach. Perhaps it's time to think. But I'm running out of time, so I want to make sure that I get our other contributors. So I'm not going to take a Q&A at this stage because I have to have a hard stop at 1:30, unfortunately. So I'm going to go to you, Ludmilla, if I may. European young leader of ours, a talented entrepreneur doing most amazing things with the company Plan A. You know that there are innovation. Well, we know that renewables and how we are trying to be more carbon efficient are technologies that are out there which are cheaper than they've ever been before, right? How do we make sure that we're able to create a kind of different partnership between public and private to move this forward? What do you think the issues are from your perspective?
For the last 8 years, we've been working on scaling decarbonization, not only through Plan A, but also through the Green Tech Alliance, which is a community of more than 3,500 companies addressing different issues related to climate change, predominantly in the EU, but definitely also outside. And unfortunately, we've seen the same systemic issues over the course of that time that perpetuate, especially in the context of the relationship between governments and the particular innovation representatives, the representatives also of energy companies and their perception of the role of innovation and the amount of money that should go into scaling such technologies. And maybe I would highlight a few considerations that have been gathered over the last years that are to be considered in the way we decide to pave the way for a future where we think about scaling technology, but also implementing solutions for decarbonization that are not based on a reality where we hope carbon capture, for example, to save the day, because that won't be able to. Just statistic on that particular technology, 10% capacity max by 2050, which is nothing in comparison to the energy that we're consuming and we're continuing to scale to consume. So first and foremost, I want to thank especially the European Commission, because I feel like through Plan A, we're a software company. We help companies calculate their emissions, decarbonize. We see a lot of different responses we saw about, for example, legislative standards like CSRD. There's a lot of complaints. Oh, we need to prepare a report for 1,174 KPIs. We don't know how to do this. We're not experts on bird migration. But the truth is that this legislation has been able to put on the same course a lot of industries. And all of a sudden, even SMEs, large corporates speak a common language about a topic that they didn't know a lot about. And I like to emphasize on this is because we keep on complaining about maybe efforts that are done that are too bureaucratic, but at the end of the day, not everyone understands climate science. I'm lucky to work with a lot of scientists, but this formulation allows for people to go on the same path, even though it's challenging. The second bit that is, for me, particularly challenging, critical, I've seen some light at the end of the tunnel, but maybe we need to work on that, is decarbonization first mentality. There's been a lot of discussion on compensation, carbon capture, And unfortunately, we have forgotten that competitiveness and environmental friendliness is the same thing. At the moment, some of our industries that are actually producing in the EU are overproducing at 50%. I can name the fashion industry and others. What does this mean? We have not gone through the assessment of understanding that the resources that are used actually to come out with a product that is this fast fashion t-shirt or something else is at the cost of our planet, but also at the cost of our economy. And if you look at public markets, if you look at the public listed companies that are working within these industries, you actually see that they don't account for this quite often. They don't understand that the legislation from the EU exactly speaks about this. Looking at the amount of resources that you spend, looking at the geographies where you produce, the transportation, but then assessing where you can maybe cut in order to be in line with the goals that the EU has set for decarbonization. A final bit with which I would like to kind of finish is this concept that profanically in planning we call CO2 equals money. So for the last 5 years, we've developed an algorithm that is able to calculate exactly what is this correlation between competitiveness and also the use of resources and how a company can be both sustainable and also economically viable. And funnily enough, companies that are growing at the fastest pace related to their transition, becoming more sustainable, using more sustainable materials, are also making a lot of money. And I remember the last time when I was at an event of your wonderful organization that puts out the maybe so uncomfortable conversations, there was someone that mentioned that even the EU did a small-scale test where they would give grants to companies that would need to just create one line of new products that would be particularly fixated on sustainability across the board in terms of production, and they were actually performing a lot better. Not only because of consumer preferences, because of the good marketing value, but actually because it was more effective for the economy. Probably there's a debate to have fully on that. Maybe there's not full attention or focus or understanding of this, but I can only finish off by saying that there's data on this. And we should shy away from thinking that the EU is losing competitiveness because we're not fast enough on sustainability. I think it's because we have not understood that the sustainability values and the practices and the funding that has already been distributed, as it was mentioned here, and there's examples here, is actually working. We're just not looking at the right metrics. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you, Ludmilla. As ever, you're a joy to have on the panel and bring that kind of very different dimension to the conversation. But as you say, as you can see it, that there's no need for a trade-off between being sustainable and competitive. But the issue is about speed. And I think the question is about the need to move much faster than we've ever moved before. It's almost like we need the urgency and adversity of the COVID virus that created the kind of system change temporarily that we've now kind of gone back to, unfortunately. But it's almost like you need that adversity and a steroid to make people think and work differently. But let's see. Kim, I want to turn to the bank, if I may. The Draghi report makes a lot of reference to you. In terms of your potential, your capacity, and what you could do in the future. What are you saying right now in thinking about the role you'll play into the future on the back of the Draghi report? But also, I want you to think about the social implications at the same time, if I may.
Maybe starting a little bit looking at the title, because I was a bit puzzled with this word at a crossroad and the question mark. Because I think most of the interventions here, I don't see a crossroad and not a question mark. And in EIB's dealing with companies, actually, most of the companies that we deal with, they have made their strategic decisions to go green. And companies, when they do make strategic decisions, they don't sort of reverse them the day after. So I think there we are lucky enough that we are actually on the right track. And Stefano, your company is certainly one of the right ones. And a second aspect is, I think, Kurt, you also mentioned it, there is actually money enough out there. We don't lack money, but what we do is that we need to activate them in the right way. And that, I think, is where EIB come in. EIB, we chose to be the EU Climate Bank in 2019, and for the last 3 years, we have, more than half of the money that we lent has gone to Green Deal objectives. Last year it was 44%, 0.3 billion of euros, and this year will be the same. And I think we would be more than ready. Also within Repower EU, we have done quite a good results also this year's. And what we can do is, and seeing is, of course, we have lost in some markets solar panels. Hopefully you can come back again. And then we are in a critical situation on wind, and that was where your wind package came in last year, Kurt, where we contributed with a counter guarantee instrument of 5 billion. And I think we might have to look into more of these things in other sectors. In the previous panel or yesterday evening, you also talked about electrification. But one of the things that we can do and help with EIB Group is to de-risk. And then we can do sort of money. I mean, we can make it easier for commercial banks to go in. And we do finance the whole value chains from the small startups with grants and equity investments, and we can do it in the scale-up. But it's in the scale-up phase that I think also, if you look into the Draghi report, that everybody agrees there we really have the biggest problem at the European side, and we do need to find better ways to ensure scale-up. That we do through partnerships, and we do it again through the wind power package idea. But there's a sense of urgency because we cannot wait until the next MFF.
No.
The problem is that the money from the next MFF will not be paid out before 28.
Exactly.
So we basically need to do something urgently. And again here, because I mean there's no money left, and a country like where I come from, Denmark, they don't want to pay more public money. So we need to crowd in the private money, and they do want to be crowded in. So we need urgently to find a solution for that. But it's also clear, looking at the green transition, it has to be just, as you said. There's a social aspect to the whole transition, and which is extremely important, because that's also why this, I mean, frankly speaking, the next mandate may be called a little bit less green, more implementation, and that's a bit the political price we saw with the elections to the European Parliament. But here again, EIB can be very active, and we are actually very active. In a city like in Katowice in Poland, we have supported a lot of transitions away from people working in the coal mines. We're doing it in other regions, like in Lutetia in Germany, one of the last remaining cohesion regions in Germany. We have been active for a number of years, and to try to reskill and to do new things in development regions, and where we have to do a green transition. And here I think one of the key aspects that we see it for the next commission will also be skills and reskilling. Sure. I'll stop here.
Thank you. You did that remarkably well in less than 5 minutes. If I can ask you about that central conundrum you say about not enough money. You know that there's money can be crowded in, and actually the private sector want to be crowded in. Tell us a little bit more about how you can lead that story. Or is it for someone else to lead that story?
I think actually we need to.
If I may, what we do know in this, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, what we do know is that venture capitalists are not coming to us by the bucket load in the way that they are in the United States and elsewhere. We've just, in Europe, we've failed to recruit the kind of venture capitalism that is buoying up other economies. So if you could just tackle that one.
No,
at the
I
same
mean,
time.
we have the European Innovation Council and the European Innovation Fund, which I think is maybe not exact 100% the model, but it is something to be inspired by. I see a key role for the Commission. Certainly we cannot do this, nobody can do this without the steer of the Commission, but I can also see a key role for EIB. I mean, we are the implementing partner in the European Innovation Council, and I think we can build a little bit on that. And we know that there is a lot of also pension funds, big funds. I come from, again, Denmark. We have huge funds, biggest in Europe. And I think they have a lot of money to invest, and they are also eager to talk to other people about how and where to invest.
Yeah. But the thing is, I hope that both you and the Commission don't look at each other and say who's going to move first. Actually, that you really need to. It's almost like the opportunities here. You've got innovation that's actually ready to go, and almost you need someone to be a czar to say, let's knock heads together and get this moving. I'm not asking you to answer that question, but it feels like that's the moment. The moment is ripe. The Draghi report creates the context, and you just need a bit of political leadership to move this in the right direction. But I've got less than I've got 5 minutes, and I really want to hear from Monica, because Monica's going to really, as the president of the European Alliance for Saving Energy, or energy saving, and in full transparency also a trustee of ours, but is never bound by her independent thinking, I can assure you, whilst she was in the Parliament and elsewhere. You are, you're very clear and focused about energy efficiency, and to be able to really, you have ideas in terms of how that could be moved forward, right? But as a tool, where from your perspective, does energy efficiency lie in the competitiveness trajectory?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm very glad to be here this morning. Well, first of all, the first issue to be mentioned is that I've been in this town for quite a long time now, to know that there are some fashions that come about. And these fashions need to be, let's say, filled with contents. And now the new buzzword is competitiveness. But I don't believe that you can be competitive. No, if you have to be competitive, you have to be confronted with somebody else. Otherwise, you're not competitive, which in itself is a bit strange as a concept, because we are striving to have a vibrant economy which is actually not only sustainable, but able to bring more wealth, more jobs, et cetera, to our communities, and not only to be competitive in relation to other people and other systems. So I want to go back to the substance of this, and that is that in order to be competitive, not only towards the outside, but also towards the companies inside the European Union, we need to be climate friendly. We need to be sustainable. Yesterday, there was a very interesting world outlook that came out from IEA, and in this report, there were 2 or 3 concepts that for me are really important. The first is to say that in this moment, the price tendencies tell us that, and notably of oil and gas, tell us that unless there is a very strong action in favor of climate-friendly policies and measures, we are not going to get them, because the market, what we were talking about earlier, and the prices will not give the right signals by themselves. So just to mention, the fact of the, for example, of energy crisis or energy prices, I come from a steel area in Italy, okay? They're all saying, oh my God, our energy prices are too high. But in reality, if the price signal would be given not only by the amount of energy needed, not only by the amount of energy produced, but by the amount of energy needed, and you would reduce a lot the amount of energy that you need, your price would be lower. And very many years ago, the European Commission made a very interesting impact assessment study around the energy efficiency directive, saying that our competitiveness in relation to the United States, it was years ago, is not affected by energy, because we are much more effective and we need less energy. So my answer to you is, if you don't, and it goes back to what the representative of EDF said today, if you're not managing demand, at least at the same level in which you are managing supply, you are not going to be able, because first of all, you are wasting a lot of resources in producing energy, but you are actually not producing, you're not spending resources in sparing energy, in saving energy. And I would like to come back to one phrase that you just said, that we are actually focused in the European Alliance to Save Energy on saving energies. True, that's true. There are technologies, this is a real industry, it is not simply technologically advanced, actually there is a lot of innovation there, but I want to underline the fact that energy efficiency is a part of the energy system itself. So in reality, what you have to fight for is an energy system efficiency. That is to say that you have to put from one side the supply and the energy efficient technologies, and for me it's renewables clearly, efficient grids and energy efficiency technology, and from the other side, the fossil fuel supply. Because if you don't produce this kind of separation, you are bound to be confused and to be confusing. And today, this is, at least according to us, the big risk, and I will finish by that, the big risk that we are facing today, confusion. What is green? What is not green? Where should I put my money? You know, if I don't have a clear idea of what green is, and according to me, CCS is not very green because it will come in 2060. According to me, nuclear is not at all green because it is producing scoria, blah, 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 and it is not technologically advanced, at least not before 2050. So the concentration of what is green, renewables, energy efficiency, and a few other things, is for me absolutely key, because otherwise our friends from the EIB and our friends from the Commission will have a very, very heavy task in making their clean industrial deal concentrated on what is really needed to create the jobs that Andrea was talking about and to help SMEs, but also big companies, frankly, to make a very effective transition. So for me, energy efficiency is linked, is the same thing, basically, than having to change towards a clean, not only industrial, but energy system.
I can tell, you know, she never holds her punches, right? And she needs to go back to politics, clearly, because I think you're itching for it. You need to go back in. No, wonderful. But yeah, I think it's a great way that, you know, you're saying, define green, because actually it's the emperor has no clothes type of moment. I don't think it's as crucial, bad as that, but you're quite right. Definition matters. Just as Ludmila was saying, that actually clarity of regulation can actually be something that can create momentum and improvements rather than just disimprovements, if you like. But thank you very much. I'm out of time, but I'm going to 60 seconds, Stefano. 60 seconds.
No, first of all, thank you very much for the appreciation for what we are doing in Trisan. It's really nice to hear that. I hope I could pass the passion that myself and the team there in Catania is proving that Europe is able not only to make innovation in labs or writing papers, but transforming that into something commercial and at scale. Although, as a CEO, I still have a big worry. I'm very worried about the sustainability of this business, and this cannot only be solved by the technology and the industrial competitiveness. It has to be solved by other means that today I don't feel I have at hand. And I really like to close this with this sense of urgency. I know you are all working on this, but we need to have that fast, because I need something to tell to my stakeholder, to my people as well, to make sure that they have a future.
Thank you from the coalface, if I can call it that, which is ironic, me using that phrase. But no, that's why we wanted to make sure that, you know, there are many companies, but there's something here about the moment of time, but also the innovation that seems right for a kind of a, let's say, government, public-private partnership, but also led by creating the right conditions for something that could become made in Europe innovation at scale. Colleagues, I have never done this before. What I mean by that is not take a Q&A. One of the things that we pride ourselves on is to have an interactive discussion with the audience, and I can't do it because the buggers have got another event at 1:30 that we need to clean up for. So I with a heavy heart to say I'm so sorry that we've not been able to engage you. But I hope that this, I suppose that that's been made up for the liveliness of the quality of the contribution from the panel. So I want to thank all of you, firstly, in the usual manner. I mean, this debate's going to continue, obviously, and we hope that we've been able to provide some inspiration into what that should be about. I urge you to look at this again. 10 policy choices for a new social contract for this new mandate. Please download it or take a copy with you, because it's full of insight in terms of what the new mandate should do, especially on decarbonisation. Thank you very much. See you all again.